Hey guys, in this video I'm going to break down downward facing dog pose, or Adho Mukha Svanasana as it's called in Sanskrit. And although this is a basic pose that shows up a lot of times throughout our yoga practice, these little tips and details might help you get a little bit more benefit out of the pose and just find a version that's a little bit more appropriate for your body. So to get into downward facing dog, let's start off in a tabletop position, stacking shoulders above wrists and hips above knees. And from here, walk your hands forward about a handprint so that now you have your hands in front of your shoulders. Turn the index fingers to point forward, so that might mean that you turn the hands out a little bit more. And then from here, bend your elbows slightly and spin your outer upper arms in towards your center to integrate the shoulders a little bit more, create a little bit more space through your collarbone and a little bit more freedom in your shoulder blades. From here, untuck your toes and then just press down into your hands to lift your knees to hover. From here, start to send your hips up and back. So keeping the knees bent, we're going to first find length in the spine. And this is our priority here. So really try to get as much length as you can with your knees bent. And once you've found as much length as you can, now begin to straighten your legs. And just notice here, if as you straighten your legs, your back begins to round, this is a sign telling you that you've gone too far with the straightening of the legs. And this is perfectly normal because a lot of us have really tight hamstrings that are going to prevent us from being able to straighten the legs all the way without rounding the back. And we actually want to prioritize the length of the spine, so don't worry if you have to keep your knees slightly bent. You might find your downward dog is a little bit more here, and that's perfectly fine. If you are a little bit more flexible though, and you can straighten your legs all the way, now begin to send your heels down towards the floor. From here, press down into the big knuckle mounds, so your index finger knuckle mounds, and then spin your outer upper arms in towards the center once again. So you have a little bit more integration through the upper body, and then send your heels back away from you. So even if your heels can reach the mat, I want you to lift your heels for a moment here. And then as you do that, notice how you can send your sits bones up a little bit more towards the ceiling. So tilting your pelvis slightly, getting just a little bit more length through your spine. So notice if that's where your body is at. If you send your heels down towards the mat and now you begin to round through the lower back, you may want to just keep those heels lifted. Of course, if you are flexible enough, you may send the heels all the way down to the mat and still keep that slight tilt in your pelvis. From here, send the heels back, so pressing away from your hands and then press down through your hands. So kind of like you want to rip the mat apart in opposite directions from your feet and your hands. So now we're building integration through the whole foundation of the pose, through our feet and through our hands. And then from here, press down into the outer edges of your feet, and then energetically lift your kneecaps up. So this is going to help to engage the inner thighs while still rolling the outer thighs out a little bit more. So you get just a little bit more stability through your down dog. And then just take a few breaths. Always very important to remember to breathe in any yoga posture. And then lower your knees down to the mat. You can relax for a moment. And there's many ways to get into downward facing dog. This pose will show up often in your yoga practice and will transition into the pose from many places. One of my favorite ways to get into downward facing dog is from plank pose, because plank is an ideal way to know how far apart our feet and hands should be. So we're going to come back into that tabletop position. Walk your hands forward about a handprint again, pointing your index fingers forward, integrating your arms and your shoulders, so letting the elbows bend for just a moment and then spinning your outer upper arms in. And this is going to be your setup for plank or downward facing dog. Then extend your right leg behind you, heels pointing back, and then extend your left leg behind you. So now you've come into your plank pose. Your shoulders should be stacked above your wrists. You're pressing out through your heels, and you've got your tailbone tucked. From here, all you need to do to get into downward facing dog is send your hips up towards the ceiling. And you may adjust your feet if they're not hips width apart. You're going to want to have your feet hips width apart, and as I mentioned before, your hands will be shoulder width apart. And so this is where you're going to find your ideal length for downward facing dog. Once again, you might be a little bit more here with your knees bent, and that's perfectly fine. And then you should be able to move from your plank to your down dog with ease without having to do any other adjustments. Once again, remembering to breathe. Well, I hope these little tips will help you to find a little bit more benefit from your downward facing dog. This pose shows up so often in our yoga practice that I really find it so beneficial to take a closer look at some of the details in this pose so that you can really get a lot more out of your practice. If you enjoyed these tips and you're looking for more, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and feel free to post in the comments any other questions that you have about this pose or any other pose. And if you have any poses that you're looking to get a little bit more tips on, please let me know what those poses are. I'll be releasing so many more videos on tips to help you to get the most out of your practice. So thanks for joining me.